Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the second part of Real Talk. Today we've been talking about people who may end up in a care home or need care at home, who have properties of their own, who need to make sure that those properties are protected, or they need to pay for the care cost and those properties get deferred by the local authority who provide the care facility. And as I said, I have a very eminent lawyer with me, Asif Abubaker from Kingswell Watts in Dewsbury, who has been sort of navigating us through this very complicated, myriad legal complex situation to explain to people what could happen and how you may be able to protect yourself. A lot of people think they're not going to be affected, but believe you me, the number of people who are affected by is absolutely much more than you realize. The second thing, Asif just reminded me, and I had this at the top of my head, I have this notion that anything happens, the local authority will look after me and this is their responsibility. That reality is not reality, and anybody who thinks like that is probably living in a fool's land at the moment. So Asif, before we went for the break, we talked about a number of issues around care cost, etc., around living wills, and you explained where people need to make decisions. If they're not capable, if they don't have the capacity to make decisions, then they have to give the authority to somebody else. And if that power is not vested with anybody else, then the family could be in deep trouble. So if it's, for example, if the husband dies, for example, and the wife doesn't have the power to make decision, she may not even be able to pay a bill or take money out of the account if that power is not there. So these are fundamental issues that people need to be aware of. I think I'm going to have to ask you to come back over the next few weeks to talk about these in more detail. But before we went to the break, there are a couple of issues you wanted to raise, and one of them, you said about, some of them may be Islamically not acceptable, and that is,
yes,
insurance and things like that.
Sure. I was talking about an insurance annuity payment where you make for care. So the care that you get, what you pay for, is paid for by this insurance company. Okay?
It's like a protection measure.
Yeah, like a protective measure. But there is also something called equity release. Now, equity release is you get your own home, you get up to about 70% of your value of your home, which would probably be your biggest asset, and that can be mortgaged effectively. Okay, and some people will consider this not to be an Islamic product. Others will have a different view. They may have a more pragmatic view of this, where you take 70% of the value of your home, of your wealth, and that wealth then becomes something that you can utilize in your lifetime. But it still doesn't protect you in one sense, because that 70% that you take out will then get engulfed, the property will get engulfed in interest, because you're not paying money back each month. It's just adding interest upon interest upon interest every day until more than 100% of the value of the property is what you owe back. It's not designed to be paid back. It's designed so that you can live in your property for the rest of your life, or until you go into a care home.
So they will give you 70% of the value of your property. That allows you to stay in the property.
Yes.
But they will take charge of the property itself in a way.
Yeah.
So when you're no longer around, they can sell the property and recoup their money. Is that how it works? So
that's correct. Yeah.
Right. So that's what happens.
That's right.
So you're basically taking out a second mortgage on your property in a way.
Well, yeah, it's a first mortgage, because you can only do it with one mortgage being there, but it's another mortgage at the end of your
And like you say, many
life.
people may not accept that, because Islamically, we're not allowed to take mortgages.
Absolutely. I would absolutely understand that. But this is a last resort. For example, it's absolutely ideal for those people that have big assets as a home, but they can't unfortunately be able to pay for their care fees. They want to get good care, but they can't pay for it, and they know that the council is going to make them pay for the fees anyway. They may as well get the best care that they possibly can by getting the cash out of their house and be able to utilize it for their own selves. And if their children aren't around and they're not going to be beneficiaries anyway, it's the best product for them.
Yeah. So if you worked all your life, worked very hard to build up a nice home for yourself and your kids, and the kids have moved away and they can't look after you, as Asif says, this may be one option that you may want to to consider. But moving to the other possibilities, which is putting property into a trust situation.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have got some knowledge about it, but not sufficient in my view.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that the word trust is a complete getaway, get out of jail free card. It isn't. One of the things that the council will look at is the intention behind the trust. So I will go through, say, 2 or 3 different types of trust today, just to explain to you, and only in brief detail. One is a property protection trust, whereby you can probably save half the value of your home and half the value of your home by giving to each other. So whoever dies first gets the property
50%.
50%, a life interest in that property.
Right.
Okay, so that aspect of it, the first spouse is dying, will never form part of the care home fees because there is no capital that's left there other than a life interest. So the spouse has a right to live in half of the property, the surviving spouse, and the other spouse, when the other spouse dies, the surviving spouse dies, what happens is that the individual that dies second is then only liable to pay half of the fees, half of the value of the property in fees.
Right.
So you only have to, only half of it becomes attributable to the care home fees. So you save half of the house, but not all.
So what happens to the other half? If the person's passed away, that can be.
Well, let's assume that the first person never ends up going into care. That's the whole idea of this. That neither are intending to go into care. So the first person dies, gives a life interest to the second spouse. The second spouse then is cannot rely upon anybody else other than, nobody else at all, because they were reliant upon each other. Then that second spouse can pay care home fees from their half share. Okay, and that could be a deferred payment. But only half of the property goes, and the remaining half, the life interest aspect, is saved for the children and the beneficiaries.
All right.
So
they'll get half the value of the property.
And this is a tried and tested method, because this particular method, what happens with this method is that the council understand that the reason behind that was to give the first spouse a place to stay in. And that was the reason why the protective trust was made. Protective property trust, they're called. There's a similar sort of trust, which is the second type of trust we're going to explain to you. It's called a lifetime trust. And the lifetime trust is the same thing, but it also includes all other types of assets as well. So, for example, money, jewelry, shares, anything else of value, it would include that. So only half of the property that you jointly own.
Total assets, yeah.
Your surviving spouse gets a life interest, and that gets held in the trust and is not subject to the care home fee assessment.
Right.
Okay. And there's the final one, which is for those who come into the office and say, I really want to protect it all. And the first thing that we say is, well, ever so sorry, I don't think you can protect it all, but we can try. And it can't be your primary motivation. If it is your primary motivation, then it is very, very likely that the council will get involved in making a challenge against you for deprivation of assets. Now,
so this is a deliberate attempt to try and hide your assets, or move them around.
Yeah, absolutely deliberate attempt to move things around. And one of the things which is a saving grace is obviously if you have been there if you've done it 10, 15 years ago, before you go into a care home, and at that time there was no chance that you were going to go into a care home because you were fit and well, and it wasn't your sole motivation, you wanted to give it to your children. So how this sort of trust works is that you give the property to your children, who become trustees, and they give your life interest back during your lifetime. So you are allowed to use the income and the property itself for your utilization throughout your life, all the way through the end of your life until you stop living in the property. If you stop living in the property, you go into a care home, it then becomes the interest of your children.
Right.
The
So
problem with that is that you have
100%
to,
ownership,
yeah. The problem with that is that the intention can be looked at as if that was the main reason why you did it, was because you wanted to deprive those.
Yeah, yeah.
We do still do many of those, and people still do them, and often they're usually well versed in the area of law, and they usually tell us, no, I'm just doing it, I want to give it to my children, that's what I want to do. But at least that type of trust,
it can be challenged.
it can be challenged, yes,
Yeah.
it can be challenged. All of these trusts can be challenged, to be honest, with its own motivation. But there are hundreds of these being done by solicitors up and down the country. You've got to remember that it is actually illegal, it's against the law, it's a criminal offence to try to put assets away from the council.
Yeah.
Okay?
So even if you think you're moving your assets abroad,
Yes.
right? And I mean, come on, there's a whole paper trail.
Yeah.
And if the local authority finds it out, or another agency finds out that you have a lot of assets that you've transferred abroad,
Yes.
then that will also be taken into consideration.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And that's it. And in the worst case scenarios, they will look at bankruptcy of yourself, trying to take the property back, or making an assessment with the property included, and also asking the person that owns it, your child or your spouse that you've given it to, we're asking them to give it back as well, and making them pay the contribution towards the care home fees. But there's an important aspect here. I think a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to lose my home. I don't want to take it away from my beneficiary. The reality is, if it is the case that you need good care, don't just be hell-bent on doing what everybody else is trying to do and try to protect your asset so that it can go away when you die and you don't benefit from it. You worked hard for this property. And if you worked hard for this property and you want to benefit from it, then why would you not utilize it, sell it if you have to, okay, or use a deferred payment scheme with the council, use its value so that it benefits you with the highest quality care that you want. That's a choice for some people.
And I think that is a fundamental issue, because emotionally and mentally, we have, as an Asian community, Muslim community in particular, and it used to happen in the white community, 30, 40, 50 years ago as well, that we have this notion that I want to leave my assets behind for my kids.
Absolutely.
Right? And as Asif said before, and I alluded to, if you have worked very hard for yourself and you built up all this sort of assets for yourself, use it for yourself, because the kids maybe they'll be looking after themselves as well. And there are lots of parents now who've done all this, as Asif said, worked very hard, and when it comes to when they're elderly in particular, their kids have actually moved away, and they're not close by, and they can't look after the parents like you would hope that they would be able to do. So maybe, as Asif says, this is the time when you have to make a decision. Do you want good quality care, in those circumstances, or you're still wanting to leave something behind for your kids and end up in a poor care home?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because people decide to want to give something to their children. So
that's natural.
That's natural feeling.
Yeah.
But the children sometimes are far more wealthy. They are professionals. They've got huge incomes. Why would you want to give them your £150,000, £200,000 property when they've got more than that in the bank themselves?
Right.
But yet people still come into my office and they still ask for that. And I often question, do you not want to use this money, which you can legitimately, without moving out of it by agreeing deferred payments, you can agree this and you can have the highest quality care if you want to. But it's a case of it's a case of whether you want to give it all to your children and not benefit from it in your lifetime, or
but
utilize it for yourself.
Do you find that people have this mental attitude that it's the duty of the state to look after me, and therefore I don't want, I want to make sure that they don't get their hands on my assets, and therefore I want to push it away to somebody else. So when the time comes, the state will look after me.
It's a very anti-civic idea, isn't it?
I know. Islamically it's wrong in terms of
I mean,
the civil law is
forget
wrong.
the
I
Islamic
agree.
aspect of it. Islamically, anything immoral like that is wrong. But from a Western perspective, from a British perspective, it's very anti-civic. You don't want to pay the taxes, or you do not, which is really, this is like a tax.
Oh yeah, it is.
You don't want to pay the contribution that you have to make for the care that you want, but yet you still want the care free of charge. And
that's the nature of many people, unfortunately.
That's the nature of people, and I'm telling you now, it's not just an Asian or a Muslim idea or view.
It's universal.
It's universal. We have a lot of English clients come into our offices and they will do exactly the same thing. They will want to create an interest in possession trust or a will trust of some sort. And you can see, even though they will not admit it, because as soon as you tell them that it's illegal for you to do so, but there are ways in which you can protect part of the estate if your intentions are right. Suddenly, when you're having that discussion, the intentions seem to change as to why they want to do it. It's very usually, you know, I want to give it to my child, I want to give it to them now, I want them to enjoy it now. Those sorts of things. And one of the other things we make sure of when we see clients, and this is why it's important that you have a good solicitor dealing with things. Nobody can give you an absolute guarantee. There are companies out there on the internet who will say to you that you will absolutely protect all your assets. You will not. If it's subject to challenge, it's subject to challenge. You will have to prove that you haven't, that hasn't been the sole reason why you've done it.
Does it depend on the timescale and the intention, isn't it?
Timescale, intention are most
two
important
fundamental
things.
issues.
Two fundamental issues that you have to consider.
Right. Okay, I mean, that's really helpful, and I'm sure there will be people sat at home, if they understood this conversation, will be thinking now that the brain will be ticking, is, you know, what do we need to do? I don't think we can cover this subject, you know, in one discussion, and I'm hoping that Asif bhai will very kindly agree to come back at some stage so we can carry on with this discussion. Can we just go back to the LPA,
yes, sure.
living power of attorney, because that might be something that people may want to talk about more now. But, you know, they may be in that situation where they need to. What are the key fundamentals that they need to do?
So as a lasting power of attorney, you have to think about who you can trust. So usually a spouse is important. If you're worried that one spouse is going to take away everything from the other, you can actually appoint two attorneys to act jointly.
Right.
Okay, so they have to act jointly before a decision is made. So if, for example, you own a home and you're worried that they might transfer the property from yourself into somebody else's name, you have to have the spouse and a child, for example, to do that. So you can do it jointly. You can also do it jointly in several if you want, so that either attorney could do that as well. You have to take consideration of the fact that your attorney might die before you as well. If you're a similar age, if your spouse is, it's very important to make sure you appoint more than one attorney as well. I think without that, it can be quite difficult and can cause problems as well. Powers of attorney are inexpensive. They are more expensive than they used to be, but they are generally very inexpensive now. You can do it yourself. The fees are £82 per power of attorney. So usually most people need to do no more than two, one for the property and financial and the other one for health and welfare. And those two are sufficient to control most of your
whatever you own.
Most of your things that you need to control. And I think you need to make sure that you have a certificate provider, someone that can confirm that you are in fact someone of a good mind. Somebody
like you, a lawyer.
Yeah, sometimes we often the certificate providers, but if we find that we are questioning whether this person has got dementia or they can't remember and so on, then we often ask a doctor to get involved.
So it's important it's been done before you get into that sort of situation.
If you get into that situation, then there's nothing can be done other than making a court of protection application, which is incredibly expensive and expensive to run as well. And it's demeaning to a spouse or to a child that's been looking after the parent for a long time, that suddenly they cannot do anything unless the court of protection gives them guidance to do so.
That's the last thing anybody would want. If they knew what was happening, they'd be absolutely devastated by it. I hope you found today's program of some interest. I'm sorry, that we can't carry on with this conversation. It is an important subject in our community. I think there's a ticking time bomb there that we haven't realized. Inshallah, we'll come back to it very soon. In the meantime, take care, look after yourself. I'll see you next week when I have the Chief Executive of the British Muslim Heritage Centre coming on my programme, and that will be a fascinating discussion, I'm sure. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah be with you.